just say 2 verses in Tibetan to start for auspicious purposes. Sangye chodan soki shonam la jenjo bardo dani kyabsuchi tagi jinzo jepa sonamgi idrola pencher sangye trupar sho samchen tamche dewatan dewe gyutran dampar guchi dunga the dunga gyutran trawar gyurchi dunga mewa dewatami trawar gyurchi niran charanyela nebe tonyola nepar gyurchi oma soba wa shodo sabadama soba wa shodo ham. The Bodhisattva way. The word Bodhisattva, Tibetans translated as Jangjub Sampa, enlightenment hero. Hero of enlightenment, hero for enlightenment. And the word is really borrowed because we're not really a bodhisattva in the sense that until we achieve enlightenment and become a Buddha, we're not really a complete bodhisattva. We're kind of a bodhisattva aspirant or a bodhisattva practitioner. And I think the idea behind this tradition is born from the interconnectedness of all things. How there's not a single being on the planet with whom I do not have a spiritual or a karmic link. And although some of those spiritual links and karmic links may be a little bit unpleasant, like I can tell in a previous life when I was a little bit of a bully, and you were like in some schoolyard, I don't know, maybe in Poland or Scotland or one of those places, and I was a bit of a schoolyard bully. And so that time I pushed you around a little bit and maybe even punched you on the nose once or twice. But because of that we have this karmic connection. And because of that karmic connection, at that lifetime you taught you, after I punched you on the nose, you punched me on the nose. And you helped teach me not to be a bully. So I owe you that great debt of thank you. So thank you so much for that lesson in that previous life, wherever it may have happened. So this is called our karmic debt. In Tibetan, legi trebu. Our karmic debt, that with all living beings we have some wonderful karma. We may have some little bit of negative karma mixed in from here and there, like, I don't know, robbing one another or scolding one another or saying negative things about one another and so on. But we also have many positive karmic connections, not just with 1 or 2 living beings or a few on the planet at any one time, and not just humans, but with all living beings. And the great Tibetan yogi Milarepa said that the Enlightenment path, the Bodhisattva path, begins with remembering our positive connectivity with all others. And of course, though some of those negative connections might be there, but it's hard for us really to say much about them, simply because we can never really be sure that it wasn't a long-term benefit. And so the Milarepa says it begins with remembering our positive karmic connection with all living beings. When we remember our positive connection, it gives us a sense of respect for them or gratitude or thankfulness. Without a sense of thankfulness or a gratitude for others, respect for others, love is really just a kind of an emotional swooning to what we perceive as a positive quality in that other person. We may like people for various kinds of reasons, I've even met people who, got married on that basis, and some years later noticed that they didn't actually like that person that much. I don't know, maybe one or two people I've met like that. And because if we don't go beyond that kind of attraction to others, if we don't go beyond a more universal attraction to others, those kind of superficial qualities have a limited power and a limited strength to maintain their infatuation or their swooningness. So Buddha, in many of his teachings, liked to tell stories of his own previous life. And in Sri Lanka or Thailand, Burma, they have many collections of what's known as Jataka Tales. And some people say, well, these aren't really previous lives. These are probably just parables or teaching metaphors. But he doesn't call them that. He calls them Jataka, Kierab, previous lives. And sometimes he'll actually be walking along and say, oh, by the way, O Ananda, this place where we are now standing, once in a previous life. And he'll go on to tell a story. And the story will have a parable to it, or a kind of a parable styling to it. Often these are called Buddha's previous lives as a bodhisattva. And when it's a human, they'll say as a bodhisattva. Sometimes it says rabbits and birds and dogs and cats and maybe fish or something like that. Perhaps even, I don't know, mosquitoes. Although no mosquito previous life parable, Jataka parable, as a mosquito comes to mind. But he does this to show interconnectedness with all beings. And sometimes it'll show a negative, sort of seemingly negative connection with that person. But in the long run, that negative connection has a kind of a positive outcome. And I think the meaning of that parable, if you will, is that if we learn to experience others, accept others in their own way of expressing, of being, and regardless of this seeming immediate impression, if we look beyond that, then everything becomes beneficial. So I noticed one of the books that the Theosophical Society has over here is a guide to the Bodhisattva way of life, a great classic by probably 8th century Indian Buddhist master Shantideva. The Dalai Lama's probably taught that 50 or 60 times around the world. It's one of his favorite texts to teach. And in it, Shantideva makes a very strong point, always, of course, referring to sutras and teachings of the Buddha, that when we learn to see everything we experience from others in a positive way, the outcome becomes positive for both self and for others. Therefore, in the Buddhist tradition, we often talk about taking a kind of a precept. I don't know if precept is the right word in English, because precepts actually in English often have more of a solid set in stone, except didn't the stone tablets get broken at one point? I'm not quite set in stone or a ring about them. But on our first level of training, we take the precept, if you will, to try to harm others in as minimal a way as possible, in all ways to avoid, in physical ways and in vocal ways by saying negative things about them or speaking harshly to them or gossiping about them. and deceiving them by saying things like, I was a bully in a previous life and you taught me. But actually that's not a lie, that's just telling a story and adding a little salt to it. And Shantideva makes the point that if one wants to be an enlightenment hero, enlightenment heroine, it begins with that basic, rather than precept, let's say, determination. Tibetan word damsig, meaning a strong commitment to trying to do that, to try to harm others. And it also includes the mind, trying not to think negatively about others. For instance, if anyone makes you irritated or angry, trying not to allow your mind to stream into that angersome cycle. I remember when I was a young kid, before I became a great saint. Oops, I could be breaking one of those. If anyone irritated me in a hockey game or a boxing match or a basketball game or something, or even in a kind of a social event with the young ladies, with any young ladies with whom I had some amorous interest, often even days later, I would be thinking how to get even. So even trying not to harm others, even mentally, by allowing our minds to get a sort of OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, thinking and emoting cycle around them. And secondly, Shantideva says always to try to be beneficial with others in whatever small way we can be beneficial. And of course, it's not always possible to be as beneficial as that other person hopes we might be, nor is it possible necessarily to be as beneficial as we would like to be. But the mere motivation or commitment or precept to always try not to harm and try to be beneficial serves as the guide to the path of the enlightenment hero. That word enlightenment, I think, needs some kind of clarification, simply because it's used in so many contexts by peoples all around the world in different cultures. The Sanskrit was translated, Bodhi was translated to Tibetan as Changjub. And Jang means maintaining a mental presence which is clear, radiant, joyful, and open. Clear of what? Clear of anger, clear of attachments, clear of dealing with any other living being in a kind of utilitarian way. Of course, you have to deal in a utilitarian way in one sense if you're doing business with someone, or you're carrying a conversation and they say something, you have to say something back. But clear of a kind of what Tibetans refer to as nyunmang or klesha, clear of the crazy darknesses, the sort of inner demons that hop in and take over our spirit. And chub, so clear of that. Clear here also, on a deeper sense, in terms of avidya, refers to clear or free from allowing yourself to have too strong a conviction that you are the one you think you are, and that other person is the person you think they are. In other words, so Buddha said, see all things like a dream. And in other words, in a dream, you are the dreamer, and you are also the dream content. So to have that kind of openness to the interconnectivity of subject and object. And chub means a kind of a embracing everything with a sense of totality. The Tibetan word for that, gye or gyepa, is used for like a flower in bloom. We don't have a flower in bloom here, but if we wait for another blue moon, once on a blue moon, a flower will bloom on this little tree or bush. So remaining clear in that way, and also expanded like a flower in bloom, open like a flower in bloom. And of course, that's not easy to do that, is it? It's not easy to always maintain a joyful, clear, awake presence with whomever you are discussing. If you're in a restaurant and the person is working in a restaurant and the person is complaining that there was too much salt in the tofu. A friend of mine used to take trips to Tibet and Mount Kailash, and he was from a very wealthy family, but he just loved to travel through Central Asia, and he was a very strong meditator as well. And then he stopped one year, he stopped taking them, and I asked him why. He said, because there was this one fellow who came and who said to me before we left, I have only one request, that I can have marmalade for breakfast every day. And they got to Nepal, and the marmalade was there, and they got to central Tibet, and the marmalade was there, and they got to Setong and the Guru Rinpoche caves, and the marmalade was there, and they got to Ganden, where Tsongkhapa achieved enlightenment, the marmalade was there, and they got to Tashi Lumpo and Shigatse, where Madame Blavatsky, which was her sort of spiritual home base for her Buddhist inspiration, you could say. Still marmalade. But about 10 days later, one morning at breakfast, the fellow says, where's my marmalade? And the marmalade was finished. And he threw a tantrum and complained for the rest of the pilgrimage about his marmalade. So it's not always easy for us in our life to be completely relaxed, joyful, clear, open, a sense of our interconnectedness with others, or our intimacy with others, I think is a better word. It's not always easy to maintain that. And therefore, in order to have that ability to always maintain that, we have what's known as the path, the marg, the way to enlightenment, or the path to enlightenment. And therefore, the Bodhisattva Path. And we can divide that path into two kind of scenarios. One is what we do when we sit on our meditation cushion. And every Buddhist tradition thinks that if you don't meditate, you're either already enlightened or you're really a long way from enlightenment. And we don't make Las Vegas bets on either, because only one enlightened being can tell who is another enlightened being. And also Buddha said, don't gamble. And so we divide into two, what to do on your meditation cushion and what to do between meditation cushions. And I think sometimes when we look at movies on Tibet, we see lots of monks and nuns and yogis, and we think people who meditate in a sort of a strong way are probably like that, and it's not real. You need a particular kind of lifestyle for meditation to have great benefits. Otherwise, it's more like just a healthy thing to do and an encouraging sort of stimulate your immunity system and reduce anxiety and stress. And of course, it does do some of that, although I do know people who have meditated and it's made them even more like wonky than they already were. I'm not sure, is wonky a word in Chicago? But generally, it produces very good results. And who knows, wonkiness might be more enlightened. You're never very sure, because a lot of Tibetan yogis and Indian yogis, they would sign their poems as like the crazy lunatic or the drunken the drunken meditator and words like that. So it's always hard to say. Wonkiness may be another form of enlightenment that we shouldn't project too much on. But if we look over the history of spiritual traditions, not just in Buddhism, but in all the great traditions of the world, we see beings in every walk of life having great success if they learn the secret of bringing their practice into everything that they do. So not just doing on meditation cushion, but what is accomplished on the meditation cushion, bringing that into the rest of one's life. And for the Bodhisattva path, that is further divided into two more. One is generating the inner environment of a Bodhisattva. In other words, becoming mentally and emotionally an enlightenment hero or heroine. How does one become, from the inside, get the perspective or the mindset, perhaps mindset is a better word. And secondly, how to strengthen that and grow, make that grow day by day, week by week, month by month, and year by year. And so all the teachings of Buddha, doesn't matter, I think, what section of the Buddha's instruction one goes to, all those instructions have that aim or have that purpose in some degree, to arouse within living beings the mindset of the awakening hero and to provide that practitioner with life tools, if you will, whereby that mindset can be strengthened, fostered, increased, until it becomes an omnipresent force. And I think, therefore, great beings like Indian masters like a Sangha, I'll say 4th century, a lot of dates in India are kind of nebulous. We're not really quite sure, because Indians had the habit of writing their things on bamboo leaves. And over the monsoons and over the various little wars that go on and invasions and whatnot, dating is never as clear as it could be. But we'll say 4th century. He likes to speak of 22 stages of the inner mind of the Bodhisattva coming into being. And these really are based on two factors. One is how deeply or how wide or how complete becomes one's love for others, one's ability to love others. And within the context of loving others, that love for others being pervaded by the sense that one's own ability to love, or the meaningfulness or efficacy of one's love. Love here in Buddhism means a wish, looking at a child like at everyone like a mother would look at its one and only child, cherishing, regardless of whether they're in their cute 3-month-old period or their terrible twos when they're absolutely difficult to get along with, and then they turn into a Dennis the Menace, and then a teenager that drives everyone crazy and overspends the parents' cash and all the rest. But looking beyond all of that, the way the mother of an only child loves that child. But understanding at the same time, one's love can help or can hurt, depending on how one expresses it. It's always a good thing for oneself to have love, but how one expresses that love to others contextually can help or can hurt. And how can it hurt? We often see parents overly protecting their children, and then the children grow up as spoiled brats, and then they go out in the world, and the world strikes them as very, very harsh, and they have difficulty coping. So the sense of protecting like that can be beneficial or harmful depending on how much one does it. And love comes with the aspiration to benefit, doesn't it? With the aspiration to protect. So this love has to be coupled with 2 other elements, isn't it? And both of those elements are what we call in Buddhism the prajna, or the wisdom factor. And one of those is the awareness or ability to observe and interpret the interconnected context. In other words, how to protect enough so the child will remain as maximally safe as the child can remain, and at the same time not to overly protect so much that the child cannot grow. So that's called the interconnectedness factor. Some texts refer to it as the impermanence factor, or the fluid factor, you could say, the ever-changing factor. And the other side is the simple reality that we should not overly trust our own take on things. And I think as a traveling Dharma teacher, a nomadic Dharma teacher, I come across many parents having problems with their own parents and that simultaneously having problems with their own children. And just today I had to phone one of them because there's sort of a radical family breakdown. It becomes so passionate through not being able to give the right amount of distance, holding close enough but not too close, allowing enough space for movement but not enough for disaster to occur. So context is important, and this other side, not taking one's own ideas, one's own take on things overly seriously. So in Buddhism we call that shunya, or emptiness, the emptiness factor. Not taking one's ideas too seriously, not taking the other people's ideas too seriously, but rather learning to training oneself to see interchanges and exchanges as sort of theatrical play. One is playing a part in a movie within the metaphor with one's own children. The children are playing a part in their movie or their stage scene with oneself as the parent. But really, that's just that sense of oneself in that role is just a conventionality. I think when Buddha often speaks about previous lives of himself, of various students and disciples or trainees and so on, one of the purposes is to illustrate how our sense of self at a given moment is a small take on the bigger picture of who and what we are, the kind of tip of the iceberg of the totality of our being. Sometimes for emptiness they use the expression emptiness of the three circles. Oneself, one's child, and the interaction between the child. Those three are empty of separate nature because one is only in that role based on those specific conditions. Beyond those conditions, one is someone else altogether. One's child is someone else altogether. That's why I think it's very people are always amazed when their child or whatever does something very terrible. I remember when one of the incidents out on the, I think it was in Denver, where a very nice young schoolboy just went in and shot a bunch of people. And the parents were very amazed because they understood the child through, who am I? The parent, who is the child, and this is our relationship. Beyond that, the sense of self, the sense of child, had some limitation, you could say. So we call that the wisdom factor, one of the two wisdom factors. The wisdom factor of the conventionality of the beings and the wisdom factor of the emptiness or infinity, the infinite potential of who am I and who are you. So in Nagarjuna like to use that expression, see others with the same love that a mother holds for her one and only child. And he goes on to say that if there's even one living being you cannot see with such eyes, then you have not yet achieved the eyes of the Bodhisattva. In other words, of the 22 stages to enlightenment, you're barely creeping up to the first of those 22. And his point then is, once you do get that, the path becomes much faster. It's very hard to get to that stage. I think maybe a little bit like parachuting. I don't know if you've ever done it, but I can't tell a lie. I know which ones of you have done it, which ones have not, through the power of my clairvoyance. No, that wasn't the lie I shouldn't tell. But it was a lie I shouldn't tell. But it takes a while to get on the plane and get up in the air and get on your chute and get out by the door and look out and go, yikes. And then realize you're really afraid of heights. And all that takes a long time. But then once you jump and the parachute's flying and you're in the air, your path to landing on the ground, feet first, goes much faster. And so Nagarjuna and Asanga both very strongly recommend that in the beginning of our spiritual training, to try to cultivate that kind of love for all living beings, because then the force of that love becomes like a great wind blowing the vessel, the sailboat of our spiritual practice to the jewel island of enlightenment. So many of those texts talk about when you're on your meditation cushion, how to cultivate that kind of love, how to cultivate that kind of compassion, that kind of bodhisattva way of looking at others, intimate way of looking at others. And then between meditation sessions, how to maintain some kind of sense of interconnectedness with others in one's relationships with them. In other words, not to just sit down and do that, but they give the example, sandalwood in cloth. When you sit on your meditation cushion, it's like wrapping the cloth of your life around a block of sandalwood. And when you get up from your meditation cushion, then that block, that fragrance of sandalwood should pervade the cloth that was wrapped around it. In other words, your life should be pervaded by that love, by that emotional openness, by that emotional sense of intimacy. Now, seeing others with the love a mother holds for a child between meditation sessions takes a fair amount of effort, doesn't it? And the Shantideva in his text speaks of two qualities being the most necessary, being indispensable. Trempa Tangsheshen in Tibetan, practice of mindfulness and practice of, as often, I don't know what Vesna translates it as in her rendition of the guide to the Bodhicharya Avatara, Bodhisattva Avatara, but often translated as alertness or attentiveness or something like that. But literally means keeping yourself in the here and the now. Keeping yourself in the here and now. You know, even in crimes, we speak of two kinds of crimes, those of which were plotted and premeditated. I don't think that you should use the word meditation in that way, but anyway. It's a kind of a misuse of meditation. Trempa means remembering. That's what we're doing. We may be a cook in a restaurant, or a CEO of a company, or the president of the US of A, or the prime minister of Switzerland. I can't remember. What's that prime minister's name? In Europe, if you say, what's the president of the USA? They go. But remembering what we're doing, regardless of what is if we're with our kids, if we're with family, if we're with our friends, if we're at work, if we're driving on the highway. It means remembering that being fully mindful, bringing that mindfulness into the present moment, that this is my commitment. Don't harm anyone physically, verbally, or mentally by thinking, oh dang, that guy cut me off. If only I had a machine gun. One of the cities I was just through, we were driving home from a meditation session, and my host was driving the car. I said, I wish I had one of those James Bond cars where you could put a button and a machine gun could come up on the roof, and this guy in front who just won't get out of the way and driving, and the left lane when you should be going, which is the fast lane. They put it on cruise control. If only I had a machine gun. And of course, premeditated crimes are people like think and make a big thing, but most actual murders and assaults and things like that aren't like that, aren't they? They're really because people lost mindfulness of what they were doing. They lost their mindfulness. Unless we are aware of who we are, where we are, what's going on. Now, as I mentioned earlier, in Buddhism we like to talk about these three circles. Right? So we'll often say mindfulness of the three circles. So not just mindfulness of what I am doing and what's going on with my body and my mind, my body, feeling, mind, and phenomenism I'm experiencing, dharmas I'm experiencing. But mindfulness of the three circles. I have a sense of myself as a participant in this theater. I have a sense of a colleague in this argument we're having between stay in the left lane, get out of the left lane, hit a button, bring up the machine gun, blast this guy out of the left lane. And the irritating thing when you do something like that and you eventually get past this person, you look over and there's some real sweet, lovely little old grandma who looks like your own grandma, and you think, oh gosh, I'm glad I didn't have that machine gun. But a huge percentage of harms done by one human to another are what they call crimes of passion, aren't they? Just that being lost sense of who am I? They lost sense of who are you? And they lost sense of what is this theater going on between these three elements. And so mindfulness in the context of developing the Bodhisattva mind means always being aware that one's basic practice is holding love for others as deeply as a mother has for her own child, while realizing that this love has a limited power. Misunderstanding the context, and one can do the wrong thing. Like kids with diabetes might have a real love for sugar, and the parents really think, well, just one kind of thing or something like that. Or one's husband or wife may have alcoholic problems, addiction problems, and oh, well, just one, and then things go the wrong way. Love by itself has a limited power, but it is the gas that runs the car of the path to enlightenment. Or it's the wind that drives the boat of the path to enlightenment. The two wisdom factors, the context of that. And secondly, the not taking too seriously your own sense of who am I, who are you, and what's going on. One great Tibetan Lama said, if people don't learn anything else from the Buddhist teaching on emptiness, is to not take, the one thing they should at least learn is don't take yourself too seriously. We should take ourselves completely seriously in the sense that every moment of our life is precious. When our moments are gone, our life is gone. The main collateral we have, I don't play video games, but I see people playing video games and kids of friends, and they go in and they go around and they collect these various kinds of cash and assets. If there's one asset which is the most valuable for us humans, and probably for other species as well, it's the moments of our life. That we should take seriously. As for the theater or drama, Buddha for self liked to use the sense of non-self, anatma, or If we mispronounce it in Pali, then we'd say anatta. In ancient India, there were 6 forms of Sanskrit, and when nobody's got a clue how any of them were pronounced. So depending on what parts of India they came and what script they were transliterated in, they had came out in slightly different ways. So anatma, non-self. I think I'm a parent. I think I'm your boss and you're my employee. But that's just one dimension of our life. That's one dimension of our relationship. I think you're my employee, but who knows? You could be an emanation of God, to use a theistic word, and come into my life in order to really irritate me and drive me bananas. Teach me patience. And finally, give me the courage to say, what was it your president used to say? You're fired. We can never really say who we are. I mean, our own sense of self we should take a little bit with the Buddha's advice, that we think of ourself as our non-self. In other words, we don't really know we see the tip of the iceberg of who we are as opposed to the totality of our being. Something like that. Who we think we are is not who we think we are. Whatever image we generate of ourself, it's a very tiny little picture of the vastness of our being, and cannot be found in any of our 5 skandhas, as the traditional text put it. And the same for others. Whatever I think about you, until I achieve a great level of wisdom, will just be my sense of you. And I shouldn't mistake that for the deeper reality of the totality of your being. Mindfulness of the 3 circles. Then mindfulness of when I relate to you, whether you're a beautiful person who is very wonderful to be with and exciting, or you're a very boring person, or you're a very hard to get along with, cantankerous person. Nonetheless, the wind driving my enlightenment path, my enlightenment vehicle, is the wind of seeing you with the love that a mother holds for her only child. Respecting that you might be a Buddha, you might be an emanation of God come to teach me some special lesson. You might be Tibetan, and in India, the Mahayana, they often like to say, might be an emanation of my own guru. Come to speak to me in a kind of a different language and catch me. Like, if I'm sitting with Dalai Lama, I'm always on my best behavior. I don't know about you when you're sitting with Dalai Lama, but when I'm sitting with Dalai Lama, I'm always, I don't pick my nose. I don't pass gas. I don't yawn in the middle of something he's saying. I always try to sit up. And although I consider myself the most intelligent person on the planet, I try to look even more intelligent. But when we're with others, like our kids, we'll do whatever, right? And it doesn't mean not to yawn or not to I don't know what, pick your nose or pass gas or whatever. Those are only social conventions of what is polite and impolite conduct. It doesn't have anything to do with real issues. Real issues really means having love for that person, respect for that person, and so on. So in Tibetan world and Buddhist world, they like to say, especially in Tantric Buddhism, everyone else in your life you should see as very probably or possibly an emanation of your own guru, your own lama, your own teacher. And if you can learn to do that well, you can learn something from everyone you meet. that there's not a single person, good, bad, or indifferent, from whom you will not learn, you will not grow. And also, that person in their relationship with you will have a meaningful, growth-oriented experience. They'll come out of it not feeling less than they went into it. They'll come out of it feeling treasured, feeling loved, feeling respected, feeling good about themselves. So Trempa means mindfulness of what you're actually doing, who you are, what's going on. Sometimes we put it in terms of the four mindfulness of the body. Body means the whole sense of physicality, the drama, I'm here, you're there, there's the room. The skandha of form and the five senses. Feeling is the resonance, the emotional resonance of all the phenomena that arise in the mind. I like, I don't care, seems nice, seems yucky, seems so-so. What was it in that childhood tale? Too hot, too cold. Just right. So Trempa meaning something like that. On your cushion, doing particular practices, and if you want to know what practices you do, then I've written 30 books. Buy 5 copies of each and read all of them 5 times. But otherwise, all of the works by Dalai Lama are well edited and well read, and depends on who's, of course, they're not all necessarily up to my standard of English terminology. But anyway, they're certainly good and inspiring reads. And just like when we maintain that mindset, others get great benefit. In that same way, we get great benefit. Instead of this way of our life being like driving an old-fashioned bicycle before the discovery of the air-filled tires, oval gravel roads where you felt every bump. Your life becomes very relaxed, peaceful, joyful, and harmonious. The other side of that, Trempa Sheshin, attentiveness or accuracy, I think She means to know, and Shin means precisely, precise application. One teaching I like for that comes from Tantra as opposed to the the Mahayana Sutras. In there, four examples are given. Your male energy should be ferocious and courageous, like the tiger. Walk like a tiger, ferocious, courageous. And when you see tigers walking, they always look happy, don't they? You don't see a tiger like slinking unhappy. That's not like a tiger walk. A tiger walk is... Did I do that right? I was trying to look like a happy tiger. I was born in the year of the bull, so I'm not sure if I quite caught it. And then the word there used for that is sukha, or blissful, joyful, blissful. Also as a sense of pleasure. Even when something very difficult is happening, to maintain that quality of joy and of enthusiasm, if you will. Like embracing difficulties in your life joyfully, embracing them with passion, you could say. And the second is to be like a yogini. A yogini is a female meditator. And the female meditator here means with this great wisdom quality, the great ability to have a full sense of the vast spaciousness of connectivity, how this one little moment of your experience connects to all the totality of everything in the past history of your million, skadillion milliseconds of existence, or lifetimes, or whatever we want to talk about it, and is the launching pad for the millions and skadillions of milliseconds, or however long minutes, or however long in the future. The yogini here, the female quality, represents this prajna quality of being able to lean into the vast spaciousness and the interconnectedness of all things. And thirdly, to be like a coiled snake. And in India, the snake was something holy. It's not considered. Over here, it was a snake in the grass, and we're not sure why Adam and Eve were so upset with the snake and eating it. It was minding its own business, right? It was Eve who picked the apple, and Adam's the guy who took the bite out of the apple, and the snake had nothing to do with any of that except saying, looks like a nice apple. Meanwhile, he gets all the blame. Talk about passing the buck. And I do love how they bring fig leaves into it. I've always liked figs. One of my favorite fruits. In fact, when I was I flew from Nepal to Russia in, I think it was May, to teach in Russia. And I went through Abu Dhabi. And may I tell you, the figs in Abu Dhabi. I was very disappointed that there were no fig leaves with the figs. I wanted to know what all the fuss was about. Like a snake coiled between the two. I think the meaning there, in India, the snake has this ability to swoon, to flow like this. It stands up it coils up, and its body comes up like this, and it can sort of sway like this. And musicians take advantage of that, of course. You play to it, and then it kind of dances to the music, doesn't it? And if it's attacked by a prey, it'll sit up like that, and that'll sort of, the attacker will kind of be looking at it going back and forth, and before long that attacker is kind of hypnotized. And I won't tell the outcome of the story, but it's happy for the snake. So we'll stress the happy outcome. And so like the snake, being able to balance, like the dancing snake, between the high and the low notes being played by the flute player, being able to move between the infinity of being and the precision of the exact context of the present moment. In other words, between infinity and the finite. Being able to find the place in which one feels both infinity and finiteness at the precise moment. And if infinity gets a little too loud, it coils a bit this side. Infinity here in the notes mean when the notes, in Indian music, they talk about one of the notes is called Kali, which means empty. So, like that. The empty note is reflective of infinity, and the other of the drama of our life. So the third example, learning to be like that coiled snake between the infinity of our being, ourself as a timeless soul, equal to every Buddha, past, present, and future, equal to every saint in all ways that matter. And having that great destiny of universal accomplishment, which is the destiny of every living being. Being able to poise between the vastness of being, or the silence of being, and the noisiness of the alarm clock getting up and going out and making a cup of coffee and saying to me, "Oh, Glenn, your car looks a little bit muddy from your long drive here. I think I should go out and bring a bucket of water tomorrow and wash it for you." And I'll say, "Oh, don't bother." And the fourth one, like the dancing angel, the dancing dakini, to always have a direct, very intimate relationship with every experience we have, every waking or sleeping moment. The dancing dakini, no matter what. In a dance, though, the dancer and the dancee, both of those must be in full fervor, full balance or full harmony for the dance to work. And sometimes the one leading has to work a little harder because the one following gets a little lazy or maybe doesn't know so well the steps and the movements. But whatever it is, each moment of one's life like a dance. And some dances, like ballet, they have tragedies, tragic ballets. Someone gets hurt. What was it, was it Teriyaki, or said no, not Teriyaki. What was his name? In the Karate Kid? Miyaki. I was close, Teriyaki. Just goes to show, you see, I haven't had my dinner yet. Mr. How do you say his name? Miyaki. Fighting no good. Someone always get hurt. But dance in the sense that one always embraces whatever arises with this full participatory nature. That's why in Buddhism sometimes we hear people say, "Oh, I'm very bored," or "life is boring," or "this is boring," or "that's boring." The actual theater of what happened, there was nothing at all boring about it. You were in the room with 3 people and there was no intense conversation, but you just didn't notice the drama of the dance. It was kind of a slow dance, a very slow dance. And you called it boring. So love with these 2 factors on the meditation cushion, and Nagarjuna says on meditation cushion, do it in a practical way. Start by reminding yourself how people who seem good are liked because they seem good, but that seeming, what glitters, all that glitters is not gold. Things who you dislike seem bad, but that's just in particular contexts. And see people who neither shine nor growl, or like with a cat, neither purrs nor hisses. That may seem a little boring, the neutrals. But all of these are mere conceptualizations. If we look over that person's 300 million previous lives, or even perhaps the last couple of days, we'll see many exciting adventures. Yes, when I phoned up this very elderly lady today whose family is going through this great trauma, and she's like in the very sort of last stages of her life, and she was talking about her sister. And just like 1 week in her sister's life, you could make a movie. So everything is a little bit like that. Attentiveness means always being able to apply the right method to maintain the sense of here and now, and to be fully participatory in the drama which is your life. The drama that is your life. On meditation cushion, developing some sort of distancing from this pushing and pulling we have with the objects of perception, the objects of the senses. Being able to find a place of quiet wherein these arise like rainbows in the sky, like dream objects, kaleidoscopic images, hallucinatory experiences, where we experience them fully, but without being pushed and pulled all over the place by them, penetrating to their deeper nature. And then noticing how all living beings are part of our world. They come into our life because we have a connection with them. We walked into their life the same way they walked into our life. And to maintain, to strengthen that sense of us all sharing a universal path, regardless of what our appearances. The second side of that we often in Mahayana call the Six Paramitas, learning how to be always a generous person, how to be generous with others. And there I thought I'd mention in a previous life, Buddha, it said, was a bodhisattva who went walking in the mountains and came across a hungry tiger, tigress I guess you would say, with 5 cubs. And he was with these 2 brothers, and they were princes. Some of these stories, Buddha likes to be a prince in a previous life. Sort of like Prince Charming, although in this case, he was Prince Chef. And the tiger was dying, tigress was dying of starvation, and therefore the cubs were also dying of starvation. And so they went back to the palace, and then comes lunchtime, and the mom sees only 2 of the brothers and says, "Hey, where's the other guy?" And they remember the tigress, and they go, "Uh-oh, he's a little bit too kind." So they figure, "Uh-oh, he went back to feed the tiger." So they go back, and Buddha in his previous life as the Bodhisattva has cut off little bits of his body and fed it to the tiger, and drained bits of his blood into a cup and fed it to the cubs. And then the tigress eventually got strong enough that she could take a few bites and chomps herself. And so by the time the parents and the 2 brothers get there, there's only a few bones left, which they pick up and they build a stupa from. Around it they build a stupa, or a burial mound, a holy burial mound, you could say. Then Buddha goes on to say, well, and because of that, in this life, my mother and father in that life became my mother and father in this life. And the tigress became my aunt, and when after my mom died when I was a week old, she became my wet nurse and my nanny, and the one who actually raised me from childhood. And the 5 cubs became my 5 main disciples, first disciples. And my 2 brothers were Manjusri and Maitreya, the bodhisattvas Manjusri and Maitreya, the bodhisattva of love and the bodhisattva of wisdom. And so, if you go to Nepal, you can go to the place where Nepalis say this happened, the Nepali Buddhists say this happened, and there's lots of Buddhist temples there, and stupas, and paintings of this guy getting eaten by a tiger. And I think, I don't think many people necessarily believe that was an historical previous life, although it's not impossible that it wasn't. And I challenge any scientist to prove it was not. But as a parable, it's to show how the power of generosity, even when it leads to a minor loss for ourselves, produces great benefit, both for ourselves and for others. In this story, the Buddha then, through that power of that expression of love, goes on. Of course, it's a sort of a dark humor movie. He dies, but has a good outcome in that he goes on the Bodhisattva Path and becomes a bigger, better person. His love, universal love, becomes stronger. And he's got this force of everything going for him in the enlightenment direction. And when he achieves enlightenment, rather than just be like one of those Johnny-come-lately enlightenment guys who nothing really happens. They achieve enlightenment, they get a few dozen disciples, and then it all goes out like a little grass fire that got washed out by a thunderstorm. So but instead of that, Buddha then goes on. His lineage becomes something which lasts for thousands of years, by prophecy 5,000 years, and becomes a great world tradition. The moral is said, because if we practice generosity, every little thing we do produces great results for ourselves and others. And the Dalai Lama often says the tiger story may be a little bit too radical for many people. So just giving a smile is a good way to start. This one Italian teacher friend of mine did 3-year retreat. She says, if you can't do anything else, just take like a peach in your hand and pass it from one hand to the other hand and feel the pleasure of the fruit landing as it touches the other hand. And as Christ said, better to give than to receive. And you can try that. Go down with the homeless people and give out $1 to every homeless people or person, or $10. And then the next week, dress up in your old summer fishing gear. Oh no, you guys are from Chicago. Your lakes are all poison water. You can't go fishing. Dress up in your gardening outfit and take an old dilapidated tent and set it up down there and beg for a week and check and see which is best, giving or receiving. And on the basis of generosity with others, not just physically, but spiritually, like Dalai Lama said, just giving a smile, listening to people and so on, and ethics, meaning the ethics of not harming others. Patience or forgiveness, meaning always being gentle, forgiving and forgiving and tolerant of the behavior of everything, not just other living beings, but other living beings is an important start. Also the hardships the sort of challenges in your life, being patient with them. And patient with your own spiritual practice, your own life. And always, the fourth I like best, always being joyful in every occasion. Joy, joy, joy. Joy, joy, joy. I feel good. And fifthly, meditation, trying to meditate 4 times a day is the Tibetan formula. Tibetan Sanskrit word for that, Jan, became used the word for Chan in China and for Zen in Japan and Sun in Korea. But Tibetans translated it as Samten, which means stabilizing your inner processing unit. Inner stabilization. In other words, giving some quality time with yourself 4 times a day, even if it's only 5 or 10 minutes in the morning and mid-morning. And if your boss doesn't like it at work, pretend you have diarrhea. Just go to the washroom and sit there, and if you can buy one of those like rude toys that people use at Halloween parties and such. If your boss comes in to check on you, just squeeze that rude toy. Sometimes in modern life you have to be creative to get in your 4 sessions a day. Those 4 sessions are considered very indispensable in Buddhist practice, because if we don't do that, we lose our inner focus, we lose our inner mindfulness. And finally, wisdom, always keeping a sense of the emptiness of things, or the infinity of things, and the interconnectedness of all things. And between those two, the wisdom of how always to be beneficial in every situation.